Okay. Thanks for coming. I'm Tarun, and I'm going to be along with Kinuko, is going to talk about the speculative prefetching work. Um, so what is speculative prefetching? There are a lot of terms involved here, so please let me know if something is not clear. So there are web APIs like link.rel pre-render and link.rel prefetch, which the web developers can use, and those APIs tell the browser to fetch some content ahead of time. And the idea is like the web developer knows or has some idea what user might navigate to next, and this content might be needed for the next navigation. So, so, so standard example is like if you are a search engine, you might want to prefetch the first search result because there's a good chance that the user might click on that search result. And then if we prefetch everything, then ideally, as soon as the user clicks, the page will load instantly. So that's one example. Other is like if you are CNN.com, you might want to prefetch the main article, whichever is the hottest news right now. Um, and we did some experiments within Chrome, and we saw that for cross origin pre-render, like from one origin to the another one, if we do a pre-render and it matches the click navigation, we get a median FCP reduction of 32%, and for same origin, we get about 28%. So what are the use cases? I just said some of these points earlier, right? So same origin is like from CNN.com or Foo.com, you're fetching the breaking news article, or for cross origin, like an aggregator website like Reddit or Google search engine, or might want to prefetch some of the articles from different origins. And this API is good in the sense that it sort of encourages web developers to not use hacky solutions like iframes, loading stuff in iframes and then swapping out the iframe um, to show the instant navigation. And uh, and there's also an Android API, and other Android apps can tell the default browser to fetch some content ahead of time. So, like Google Search app can fetch content using Chrome, prefetch content. So, as soon as the user clicks on the result, it loads instantly in the Chrome. But so the APIs are powerful and they have huge impact on the performance, but they are still used very rarely. So link-rel pre-render is used on less than 1% web pages. Um, huh? so, uh, so, so although they are very powerful, at the same time they have a lot of privacy concerns. And so, what are the privacy concerns? The most of the concerns come from the fingerprinting. So you have two origins, source.com and target.com, and and the prefetching can allow the source and target to like sort of collude together and track the user from as the user goes from one website to the other website. um, so like you can so example is like email.com fetches some origin, and then it basically tells the other website that the also has this ID on user has this ID on one website and this ID on another website, and then they can sort of join together the logs and other stuff to to track the user. Um, Network isolation work that Chrome is doing. There's a session tomorrow, I think, at 10 a.m. So network isolation work that Chrome is doing basically separates the cache, uh, the disk cache within Chrome based on the top level origin, and that helps a little bit with the fingerprinting problem for prefetch. Um, but there are still some other edge cases that can be used for by origins to do fingerprinting, like link decoration. Um, so the example is like source.com prefetches a web page on target.com with the source cookies. So now the target.com knows the source cookies and the target cookies, and they can sort of fingerprint the user together. And this is currently possible with non-prefetch APIs also, right? Like you can the the websites that want to track users, they can also use image tags to sort of get cookies from other origins and then collude together to track the user. Do you want to talk about the next one?
No, sorry.
Maybe that's,
Yes. So there are a few discussions going on. As you probably know, it's also discussed that the third-party cookies in general should be probably limited for privacy concerns. It's also discussed that a link decoration in general should be somehow addressed. We probably don't know how, but that's also kind of being discussed. And another interesting thing is that for cross-origin, prefetch or cross-origin pre-rendering, prefetch resources may need to be used in the next navigation where resources are used as first party. So there are a few differences, and that's making this problem a little bit more complicated. And there's also a kind of related to correctness concerns. For example, source.com, the site making a speculative prefetching can somehow modify the state of the target.com by modifying cookies, can probably log out users. Again, this is somehow also possible without using prefetching, but this can be a problem. Another thing is that if we actually really go try to address privacy concerns and make this uncredentialed, it's going to create another issue because navigation, it's basically credentialed, so that if prefetched resources are uncredentialed, that might not be able to be just used for next navigation, or we may need to make the next navigation uncredentialed or something like that. So there are some, if we partial privacy, there will be some correctness issues, and so there's some trade-off. So
how do we do this?
Yeah, so there could be several, we only covered a few issues, but there could be topics we can discuss, like how to support prefetching while minimizing fingerprint for cross-origin cases. There's some new proposal I can talk about that too, but, or for same origin cases, or assume that we address the privacy issues for cross-origin case, we can also consider how we make it more powerful by for example, doing some more pre-processing could be another interesting topic, or how to increase usage of these APIs to be yet another question. We want to get some rough sense. One last question, there could be more, but it's what should be the future of pre-render? This is currently, as far as I know, implemented only in Chromium browsers. It's very, very powerful, as you've seen the numbers. So it could be good. Or current implementation is actually it's basically doing prefetch. So might be good to think about if this one and cross-origin prefetch can be somehow merged into the newer proposal that's currently called pre-navigate. So these are the topics. So we can I can talk, or Tarun can talk more about any of the details, but can open the floor now for. Go ahead.
Is there a microphone?
I don't know if it works.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to pass it around.
There should be some under the there.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. I was just wondering if web packaging plays into this as a way of prefetching, the entire bundle of next sites in a privacy preserving way. I think that's something that's been talked about in the past. I didn't know if I didn't.
Yes.
see it here, so
Yeah,
I'm just
it's totally something we are thinking about exploring. So now we have the basic infrastructure, or just to give more context for the audience. So we've been also working on a web platform feature that's called web packaging, that can just basically packaging up all the resources in one resource. And what Ben's talking about is like if we can just like prefetch the next page as bundle, then that can be probably just used in next navigation and might make various concerns simpler. Maybe yes. So it doesn't really address every privacy concern. Or like it would be easier to make it kind of put some restriction. For example, like if you are prefetching web bundle, it should be made uncredentialed or something. That can be easy because it's new thing, and then the resource can be just like just used for next navigation. We're just thinking about like a sub resource or something because it everything's in. So that could be one thing.
About, is it on? Hello? Okay, about the predictive prefetching, I think we need a model that somehow captures the benefit and the cost of prefetching. The benefit is, okay, I will have first meaningful pain more quickly. That could be like one thing how to capture. And for that, I by no means need all the content of the page, but only specific content. And some content actually has a bigger impact than other. On the cost side, there's things like network bandwidth, battery in mobile.
Right.
Also, if I do this while some other web page is being shown, I may have issues that I may make that page slower. I may take away the memory that I need to actually deal with that other page. I mean, we've been thinking a bit about that, and this model is by no means simple, but once you have it, you can actually run simulations, for instance, with top websites, and thereby get an idea on, what actually pays most. And if I talk a little bit about results, actually prefetching JavaScript seems to be by far the most beneficial thing, because that's what blocks you actually from getting first meaningful pain or something. In most cases, and they also tend to be relatively small, while media content is very big, so it costs a lot to prefetch that.
I think this is a good point, and this definitely makes the implementation more difficult. But the current implementation in Chrome only fetches the HTML, CSS, and synchronous JavaScript. So we do not fetch images or media or asynchronous JavaScript. So there's still some data cost associated with that. But right now the thinking is that it's probably worth the trade-off for HTML and CSS maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
And we fetch it at,
sorry. And also like by spec, it's speculative, and like a browser can do some like can make it work. It's possible not to make it if, for example, like a resource it's kind of limited. So we're not currently aggressively doing that, but we can make it more adaptive maybe, so that it works in a way that cares about resources more.
When you do the non-credential fetch, you mentioned that sometimes what you get might not be useful, because when you navigate, you do a credential like request, and then the result might be different. Is there any way for a web developer to say, those resource or sub-resource are going to be fine, like go ahead, like fetch them? Those ones are not going to be useful. To try to limit the waste, maybe?
Yeah. Sorry. So the part is currently still being discussed, and currently we are actually doing not prefetch with credentials, right? But it's been discussed that we shouldn't do that. And the one idea we've been discussing around the new proposal pre-navigate is that we only make that site, if the browser has no credentials, start it for that site. Or we are thinking about probably can add some opt-in options so that the site can tell that it's okay to be navigated without credentials, and then we can prefetch. But we are still discussing. We are concerned that it might hurt the adoption. But it's one thing we are considering.
You talked about merging pre-render, which is currently powered by no-state prefetch, and pre-navigate. What is currently the delta in functionality between no-state prefetch and what's been proposed for pre-navigate?
With pre-navigate, I think pre-navigate is basically a way for the web developer to say that this is okay to prefetch without any credentials. And no-state prefetch is how we implement that prefetch. So one is like how the web developer communicates, another is what the user agent does with that information. So so no-state prefetch right now fetches HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It does not run any JavaScript. It just basically it just runs the preload scanner and gets some of the content.
One question is that from our investigation that the prefetch will affect the traffic statistics in the server, because maybe some prefetch requests are not really user access. So that's a small problem we have met. And the second problem is that when the network quality is not so good, for example, in the 2G network, the prefetch will, because we have implemented some similar mechanism like prefetch. The prefetch will make the network congestion much better. So finally, the loading performance is getting worse, even worse. So so do you think any better solutions for such situation?
For the first one, the first question was about increased traffic on the server. So I think that's a valid concern. And there's no good answer, except that right now when Chromium does a prefetch, it sends a special header that this is a prefetch request. And that header is not standardized. So, but we send the header, so the web server can sort of drop the request if they want to, but I don't think that happens. So there's no good answer. For the second one, for bandwidth constraints network, it's definitely possible that doing the prefetch can hurt the performance. We did not see that in the matrix, but it's possible that we did not look carefully at the tail networks, which are really slow. And I think that's something that browsers should solve using more optimal scheduling techniques or something, I guess. Like it's fetched at the lowest priority, but I don't know how much that affects the higher priority traffic.
Yeah, on slow network, like prefetching something it tends to be more effective, or like you're right, so like it can contend with other resources. So yeah, maybe doing more better scheduling with priority could be a solution, but we are looking exploring that space as well.
One quick follow-up on the header. Sorry, you want to go?
Yeah. So I was wondering about this non-standard prefetch header. You were too?
Maybe same question.
Same question. Well, so I was wondering, like, what if we standardized it? Like, what protocols could we embed in that? So for example, if an origin doesn't want to allow prefetches, it could say like, no thanks.
Oh yeah, I will raise you on that. Like, what's the behavior that we want to implement? Like, if you say, if you respond with this status code, then we'll never do it again, or maybe just this time, something like that.
Yeah, I think we are somewhat thinking about it. For example, like for header one, we've made some. So we've made some attempt, and I think we are basically thinking about making it as a spec header, and for response side, for example, like as I mentioned earlier. For credential negotiation part, we think that having some protocol could be useful, so we can probably extend that like for speculative loading in general, we could have some maybe easy header-based negotiation protocol or something. Yeah, that could be a good.
I mean, I think we also went from origins some way of saying supports prefetch, right? So that
Yeah.
So I apologize in advance. It's going to be kind of a packed question, but so in the case of cacheability and uncredentialed, instead of using the special memory cache for prefetch, just using normal cacheability of the resources without vary on cookie will definitely tell you it can be used across uncredentialed. And my guess is a lot of your critical resources are going to be cacheable and it won't be as much of a problem. So maybe look at that. Using an uncredentialed, so in the pre-navigate case, we run the risk of the connections not being reusable, the same problem we have with fonts on uncredentialed. So it'd be nice if you at least warmed up a credentialed connection that would be used on the actual navigation, so you don't have to go through all those round trips as well. And just finally, a sanity check. When we're talking predictive, we're still talking site opts in and sets a pre-navigate on the link. Chrome's not doing some predictive based on links on the page, starting to prefetch content, right? Because that has all sorts of other privacy concerns that freak me out.
You can talk. So we are actually doing both. Or like for both cases, we care about privacy, and the current state is not quite really ideal.
So I mean, just to give you some
infrastructure
context, on the Facebook side, when we did some pre-navigation or prefetching, just leaking the IP address. So if I post an ad that's targeted enough that I can say, this group of people is likely to see that ad, and you start prefetching it and leaking IP addresses, I don't need anything on the URL. I've targeted the URL in the content that you're seeing well enough that Chrome just doing a prefetch is leaking enough IP address privacy that it's a real problem.
So I can answer that. So the question was, if Chrome is doing a prefetch automatically, it might leak some PII privacy information about the user to the network or maybe the other endpoint. We do automatic prefetches, but we restrict it to the same origin navigation, same origin URL. So that's a conscious decision. Like we'd never prefetch from a different origin. So it still increases the load on the network and maybe on the server. But we think that it doesn't leak any privacy information. But if you have some edge case, then
No, that sounds safer.
Yeah,
if
that
you ever
sounds
start
safer,
thinking about
definitely.
it, doing it for cross origin,
yeah, we don't do
Please
cross
don't.
origin. So yeah, I forgot what was the first question about. Sorry.
the first question, it wasn't so much a question, it's just more about using cookie or cacheability of the resources. The question / request was more on if you're using the pre-navigate to also warm up a credentialed connection, because the uncredentialed connection is going to be useless for any other resource fetches.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned something about the vary cookie, and we thought of that, but we were not sure if the web developers actually include vary cookie when they vary on cookies
If
or
they
not.
don't
They
include
don't.
vary cookie, the resource is going to be cacheable anyway.
I
So
mean,
it doesn't
Sure,
matter.
but if
yes.
there is no intermediate cache, if they don't include, so first of all, many CDNs don't really support vary and have different ways of varying a resource. So if their CDN is one of those, which is everyone, they will not have a vary cookie, and no external signal will tell us that this resource is not,
Well,
varies by
if it has
cookie.
a cache header on it and there's no credential on the request, it's fair game to cache it, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So you can
That's what
reuse
we
the
thought.
uncredentialed.
It's fair
yeah.
game to cache it, but there can be failure modes where it's like, I mean, No,
I mean,
the-
as long as you're not using the special prefetch in memory cache, which just reuses the resource, right? If you're using the disk cache
yes.
and you use no state to fetch the resources, and they have expires headers on them, and no vary cookie, it's fair game to reuse them, right? Which my bet is most of your critical scripts that you actually care about are going to fall into that camp.
Corner case, like I've looked into some pages because I expect that there should be very cookie if they use cookie and they want to respect well. It's not really the case. In some pages use no store. That's fine. If that's
but those
there,
aren't
we
cacheable.
don't cache. Some sites also use no cache. For
Also
Prefetch,
not
we
cacheable.
also, but actually we also cache. We cache for no cache. For
Right, but
Prefetch.
that's the special memory cache. I'm saying don't use the special memory cache when you're doing no state prefetch for the uncredentialed requests, and only reuse actual cacheable resources. And then you've already got the sign from the developer that these are reusable. My guess is most of your critical scripts are going to fall into that case.
Ideally, we should try to reuse the memory cache, especially on low-end devices, because the flash storage is very bad. But we should try and replicate the behavior that we have.
Memory cache is fine as long as it's
doing the same
It's not
behavior.
the special cache, right, that we have for no state prefetch, which ignores
Okay, I see what you mean.
cacheability headers. The one-time reuse special cache.
Okay.
Yeah. So also, we're mostly talking here about document, like navigation resources, and therefore HTML documents, not necessarily the scripts. Although, the no state prefetch will also bring in the scripts. But I think the cookie problem is mostly for the HTML, not the scripts. Otherwise, for the specifying the purpose prefetch thing. So I have a PR. I should probably get back to it, or someone else should. But I would separate that from, like, it's very easy to specify. It's non-controversial. I would separate that from please don't include me in speculative prefetches kind of signal from the origin, because it seems like something that is significantly different. We could think about that, but it's, orthogonal.
I think the browser can learn that too. Like if it sends the browser can learn that too. If the browser sends a request, prefetch request, and the server doesn't reply back, maybe just add it to a local list of some sort, and sort of not use that for some time.
Yeah, I would have preferred something more explicit.
Standardized, yeah.
And ideally something that we use like max edge and whatnot, like maybe you don't want to do it for 1 month, and then later you may want to revisit that behavior, right? So trying to reuse the existing semantics that we have.
Does Chrome recommend any response to go away?
I don't think so.
No.
It's just open.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of API, you mentioned the web API for Prefetch, but in Android device, many apps use Android Web View to load a web resource. So is that possible to expose a Web View API? I mean, it's a Java API, maybe not suitable for this topic. Maybe the Android team, but I think maybe good for developers to use Android Web View API to do some prefetch work. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with the WebView APIs, but for apps that use Chrome custom tabs, they can call a Chrome custom tabs API, which calls a default browser, and the browser is supposed to do something with that information. Like maybe it will pre-resolve the address, it will pre-connect, or it might even do the whole no state prefetch. So there's already an API in Android that for Chrome custom tabs. For WebView, I'm not sure.
So on one of your earlier slides, you were talking about the iframe hacks to preload things and wanting to remove those. I was just curious if that's at odds with the other effort going on around portals, which is sort of like leaning into that behavior to swap in an iframe effectively. And I want, like, if imagine a world where portals takes off, does that address some set of these use cases here? And yeah.
Yes, yeah, I believe so. And actually, like for cross-origin case, portals will have not exactly same, but the similar privacy concerns. So what we are thinking about internally is at least some of the infrastructure we will be modifying for making these work in a way that respects privacy would be able to be used by portal as well. But like from API wise, yes, portals could be yet another way to make the next navigation fast and smooth.
And I think portals only work if the developer has opted in. Is that correct? The portals only work if the developer has opted into the web packaging. Is it?
So
No, it's not.
So portals does not provide anything about privacy preserving. Like one option would be to use web packaging and exchange so that you prefetch something from a server that you trust. In terms of like opt-in, it's not an opt-in at the moment. We do want to respect the X-frame options. There is a question of like whether or not we need something else, or should we just reuse what exists for iframe? Maybe you don't want iframe, but maybe you want portals.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if people have like feedback on that.
Just one more point on the question that Addy had about the delta between no state prefetch and the proposal for pre-navigate. So I believe no state prefetch scans main resources and
Yeah,
fetches
that's a
things.
big difference.
Yeah, and
so,
last I remember, the proposal for pre-navigate will just fetch preload header or requests specified in preload headers.
There are multiple components, but by the definition of how prefetch prefetch works, that's current. So for pre-render, we currently let the pre-scanner run and discover resources. While for prefetch, we want to do that. So if resources are explicitly declared in a header, or those will be also fetched. So that's the biggest difference probably. Yeah.
Okay, so pre-navigate will not have some pre-scanner like effect, like.
So if pre-render should be merged into pre-navigate, it's just an idea I thought of and haven't deep thought about that.
Okay.
But if we try to do that, we'll need to go through again, like if it's going to have more problems or like more concerns around privacy. So it requires some more discussion, I think.
Okay.
So I think this is something we've discussed in the past and is probably already decided, but just to confirm my memory, these things, none of these things like for navigations will go through a service worker, correct?
That's the current idea, yes.
All right, so that's our current plan.
So on your last slide, you were posing the question about whether we should get more aggressive with pre-warming. I was curious with respect to generating V8 code caching artifacts. Are you thinking about making that like a developer opt-in if they're using pre-navigate or prefetch, or is that more something we want to do at default?
Yeah, maybe.
That's an open question. Yeah, we could do that.
So I'm working with a partner who is kind of measuring some trade-offs with V8 code cache, and they're interested in having some way of doing hinting, although I know it's sort of a controversial topic. So I'm doing an origin trial. I intend to experiment on BlinkDev to do a hint through a header, which may not be the best API service, and this would only affect cache storage to begin with, because that's where we always optimize. So it's really asking, so please don't optimize me. which is maybe easier to sell. But I want to collect some data, and if that data shows that there's a benefit here, I hope to start a conversation saying, like, sites are capable of measuring this and making a decision, and they should influence our heuristic here. But I think that is TBD. So I hope to have more data soon.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Sorry, just jump in really quickly again on the pre-navigate, not running the preload scanner and only using, would it be preload headers? Up until now, sort of the guidance we've been giving developers is preload headers are for resources that the scanner can't discover, basically hidden things that a tag manager might inject. And so now you're not going to get the critical resources the page actually needs.
Right. Yeah. We are aware that it's not the current how web's design or how web's design how the current page is being written. Yeah. So if we make the changes in these areas, we will probably need to reach out to developers. Yeah.
It might have to be a different header. I don't know, just to avoid overloading and confusing and changing behaviors.
Wow. Yeah, Donna, any plausible ideas are really welcome.
One controversial idea is like maybe not header, but if there was a way for us to fetch a manifest that would describe, if you really want to speed up my thing, those are the resources that you need to fetch. Because that's what we want. And to the extent that your developers are aware that this is how the website is going to be rendered, they could maybe tell us without having to fetch some main resource or crazy headers and whatnot.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. When we start talking about manifests, there will be tons of nice ideas around that. So we can discuss that later again. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for coming.